Okay. So good afternoon all and the one present here. It gives me tremendous pride to welcome you for today's event. On behalf of Kautilya School of Public Policy and Geetham University, we would want to thank Dr. Subbarao for not only choosing us as the platform for the launch of the book, but also the immense grace and knowledge he has showered on us during our engagement of more than 2 years now. He's been with us in the capacity of distinguished visiting professor. And we appreciate the diverse range of open and closed sessions Dr. Subbarao has conducted at Kautilya, covering subjects such as leadership lessons I learned the hard way, RBI in everyday life, the freebies debate, globalization, experience of a civil servant, and many more. These sessions have been both informative and immensely inspiring and motivating for us. Dr. Subbarao's profile is well known. Nevertheless, let me reiterate some aspects. Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao served as governor of the Reserve Bank of India for 5 years between 2008 and 2013. Prior to that, he was Finance Secretary to the Government of India and Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. As a career civil servant, he worked in various positions in the state government of Andhra Pradesh and in the federal government of India. He was a lead economist in the World Bank between 1999 to 2004, in his capacity first as Finance Secretary and later as Governor of RBI. Dr. Subbarao was alternate governor for India on the governing boards of the World Bank and the IMF. Subbarao's book, Who Moved My Interest Rates, chronicling his experiences leading the Reserve Bank of India through 5 turbulent years, is notable for the way he explains the policy dilemmas and challenges facing an emerging economy central bank in a globalized world. After stepping down as governor RBI, Subbarao was distinguished visiting fellow at National University of Singapore and the University of Pennsylvania. Subbarao is currently distinguished visiting faculty at Kautilya School of Public Policy and Yale University. Let me also introduce our moderator for today's session, Ms. Smita Sharma. We've been fortunate to have her with us from a long time as a visiting faculty. She's a senior award-winning independent multimedia journalist. She, in her 21-year-old journalism career, she has been the foreign policy in charge, contributing editor and anchor with newsrooms including DD News, Network 18, India Today, TV9 Bharatvarsh, and India Ahead. She was the deputy editor for the Tribune. Her articles have been published in many leading newspapers. She contributes regularly to international outlets including DW News and BBC World Services. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. And here is the book. I've been lucky to get one copy, signed for myself, and you can also get one. And without taking much time now, I would want to hand over the proceedings to Ms. Smita Sharma. Over to you,
Are we unveiling the book first, or should we have the dean come and join? Done it? Okay, thanks.
So we want a photograph of you.
Please,
with the
come in here. Come in here. Just join in.
I already have a copy here. You can Thank you very much, Dean. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shivangi, for those very kind words. And good afternoon, everyone here. It's always good to be back at Kautilya, and especially when the occasion is so special and my guest here so esteemed. Congratulations, sir, on the launch of your new memoir, or as you say, these are notes from your life, perhaps different from your previous memoir. Dr. Subbarao was born in Kovur. This is a mufassil, as he describes it, on the banks of the river Godavari. He went to Sainik School initially, then to IIT Kharagpur, IIT Kanpur. In fact, it was also a question posed to him during his UPSC entrance as to which was actually a better IIT. I'm sure things have changed much over these years and the decades, but he's had a long, distinguished career. Of course, serving at district levels in high positions in government, then moving on to become finance secretary, the RBI governor, and RBI governor at a time when he hit the ground really running. when the world was facing the global financial crisis. The Lehman Brothers crash had happened, the biggest sort of a crash in the corporate history. And it literally took, I think, an economic crisis for two RBI governors to come out with full-time books, full books, not just, in fact, notes. Mr. Y.V. Reddy, from whom he had, and of course, Dr. Subbarao itself. So, we'll try and pack some elements of his early life along with the challenges he has faced over the career span of so many decades, and try and also rake up some controversial issues. I'm a news person. I do need some news headlines. So maybe some stories that are doing the rounds today. Before I take in questions from the audience, I'm sure all of you will have many questions to ask as well. So, there are lots of anecdotes that you have shared in the book, and I'm not going to spill out the secrets there. Go through the book. Some very interesting, including how, sometimes an unthought daredevilry could actually serve a 20-second unthought daredevilry of wanting to get inside a train and hanging when the train door is closed could be a very, very scary moment in life. And I'm so glad that you survived that, sir. But just to begin with, you decided to go into public service at a time when it wasn't really on the radar of IIT students. The few students who were going in, they wanted to go in to US perhaps for higher studies and higher education, but yet you made this choice. And in your, in your entrance exam, in fact, one of the questions that was asked to you was about the Jean Sartre comment on man is condemned to be free. You had an interpretation then. Over the years, a lot of our interpretations change. Today, would you want to start off maybe by telling our students how do you interpret that thought and why it sort of stayed with you?
First of all, my thanks to the Kautilya School and to Dean Akbar for organizing this book launch event. It means a lot to me, and thank you, Smita, for that opening question. When I went for the IAS interview, I had to write in my background note what I did, and I told them that I'm on the IIT debating team. So one of the questions that was posed to me was, what is the latest topic you debated on? That topic was, man is condemned to be free. Man is condemned to be free. It's taken from the existential philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, this question came in about 20 minutes into my interview, so it didn't go very smoothly till then. And then they said, what did you say about that? What do you mean by that? What did you say in the debate? What I said was the following, that in life, we all have to make choices. We are forced to make choices. And we don't like making choices because it's a very difficult decision. Whether you want to study engineering or medicine, whether you should become a journalist or join the foreign service, whether you should marry or be defer marrying for another 5 years. These are very difficult questions. And you want somebody else to decide for you. You want some anchor. So traditionally what we've done, I'm taking a bit long, but just to give you the background, traditionally what we've done is found an anchor. This is what God told me. You go to God and ask, or you go to your parents and ask, you go to your mentors and ask. So you don't want to make choices. But what you learn over a lifetime is that you can't outsource choice making to anyone else. You have to make choices yourself. In other words, you're condemned to be free. So it's not as if I explained to the interview board as fluently as I have now. I'm not sure I've explained fluently now, but it didn't go as fluently then, certainly. But in the last 50 years since that interview, I've had time to reflect on it. And why did that particular response of mine stay with me all these 50 years? Because every time I went through an episode, a situation, a problem, a controversy, or a crisis, I responded in a certain way, and I said, could I have done differently? Could I have made a different choice? And then I realized that life most of the time doesn't give you second chances. Okay, you have to take the choices as they're given to you. And that's the essence of existential philosophy, which is that you have to learn from your own experiences. You have to fall back on your own lived stories. You can't outsource the decision-making, choice-making to someone else. And that's one of the lessons, leadership lessons I learned in my career and indeed in my life.
Absolutely, and I think we all also have to make our own mistakes, which is why we seldom try and learn from others' mistakes. Unless we've not made our own, we don't learn really. And another life lesson that has stayed with you, and it's also very interesting when he topped the civil services, the Rouse Academy who came in to inform him, and he wanted to call back his father. You had to go through a lot of hotlines and telegrams, and you couldn't get through. The next day, the father actually had to listen to all India radio services to get to know about his son topping, in fact, nationwide. But the other lesson that stayed with you that you've mentioned, which is a quote, and you say that make your bed every morning. It's a General McRaven quote. Would you like to tell our students about why it sort of left an impression on you?
First, before I respond to that question, what Smita is referring to is old times, 50 years ago. Many of you youngsters cannot relate to that. But my book, hopefully, will be a journey to your parents' time or your grandparents' time, and you will experience what life was like before you had cell phones and internet. On this question about make your bed every morning, I was quoting from the commencement speech of Admiral William McRaven, when he gave a commencement speech in the University of Texas where he was a student. What he says is the following. When he was being trained as a Navy SEAL, as a Navy commando, one of the things they had to do as trainees was to make their bed first thing in the morning. And the instructor would come and check if the bed is square, the corners are square, there's no rumbling on the cover, the pillow is kept there, the blanket is folded neatly and kept there, and somebody would come and inspect. And this man was thinking, oh my God, I'm training to be a Navy SEAL. What's the use of doing all this? Train me to be a Navy SEAL, don't train me to make beds. But then he realized over time that making your bed first thing in the morning gives you a great sense of accomplishment. If you make your bed right in the morning, that eggs you on to do other things right throughout the day. It gives you that motivation and the right start to do other things well in your life. It also gives you a sense of discipline. And what the lesson I took from that is that nothing is too trivial. Even everyday things you do are important. And I related to that from my own Sainik school experience, where the principal who was Commander Almeida is no more, a great man. I learned a lot of things from him. One of the things he used to tell us was, we were all children of 12, 13, 14 years old at that time in a hostel. He used to say, eat while you eat, read while you read, study while you study, play while you play. All of you who are brought up on multitasking may not relate to that. But I found, even in the era of multitasking, I found great value in that. That concentrate, focus on what you were doing. And he used to teach us to sing the national anthem. National anthem should take about 2 minutes, 38 seconds according to the Army protocol. And he used to tell us 2 minutes, 38 seconds, okay? All of us stand up, shoulders straight, head held up, chin straight, and sing with gusto, sing with pride, and sing as if nothing else in the life in world matters except singing national anthem for the 2 minutes, 38 seconds. Okay? That gave a sense of accomplishment, of course, but also nothing is unimportant. Do whatever you have to do it with your full attention, with your wholehearted attention, as if nothing else is there in the world except doing that particular task.
I think it's very difficult for most of us to sort of now relate to, given that we are all in this Insta-reel world. Yeah. We are multitasking constantly, and mea culpa, but...
mea culpa too, but...
so I just thought that let's open it up with two of these, in fact, impressions early on into your life, and these are good lessons for all our young students and future policymakers to learn for, because moving forward, you do mention that an important thing for being in public policy is keep your ears to the ground. In fact, in 1974, July is when you had your first posting as sub-collector. This was Parvatipuram subdivision in Andhra Pradesh, and you learned the hard way that, if you're wanting to look at tribal development, it's really not just about learning about tribals and their culture, but it's also learning about the macroeconomics of poverty, the micro challenges of poverty. So, would you like to share maybe some instance
Sure.
which in this training period in particular taught you that how what you were learning as a feedback maybe from your colleagues was not really the same thing as being on the ground and learning it on the job?
Thank you for that question. One of the lessons I learned over my long career, I've spoken about it in the Kautilya school as well, is to keep your ear close to the ground. And to illustrate how I learned that story, I relate to my experience in my first posting as Sub-Collector Parvatipuram in North Coastal Andhra Pradesh. I'm talking about the mid-1970s. And the Srikakulam district, where Parvatipuram subdivision was a part of that, was a hotbed of the Naxalite movement. Some of you might have read that the Naxalite movement started in Naxalbari in Darjeeling district of West Bengal in the mid-1960s, and then it hopped over Odisha and came to Srikakulam district. And the district was hit by an intense Naxalite agitation for about 4 or 5 years. And by the time I went there on my first posting, the agitation had died down, and we were in the reconstruction phase. Shaken by the experience, why Srikakulam became vulnerable to Naxalite movement is a different issue, we'll leave that. But shaken by that experience, the state government launched a massive program for tribal welfare, and my charge as the sub-collector was to implement tribal welfare programs. And I was a youngster, 24 years old, with full enthusiasm, gusto, I plunged into it. Then many things we were doing, building schools for them, hospitals for them, roads for connecting tribal villages, lots of welfare activities. Then I realized that there were lots of protective measures for tribals. For example, there's a legislation which says that any loan from a non-tribal to a tribal is null and void. It also says that any sale of land by a non-tribal to a tribal is null and void. This is very progressive protective legislation. What it says is that if I'm a tribal and you are a non-tribal, I've taken a loan from you, and if I go and complain to authorities that I've taken a loan, even if I admit that I've taken a loan from you, Akbar, let's say, is the sub-collector. I go to him and say, I've taken a loan from Smita, and he can write an order saying that loan is voided, is done, cancelled, and I'm free of debt. Okay? This legislation was not done by our government, it was done during the colonial time, mid-19th century, 1850s, 1860s. It was done at that time. Very progressive legislation. My first surprise was, if there is such protective legislation, how comes thousands and tens of thousands of tribals are indebted? How come thousands and tens of thousands of tribals have lost their land? How come they continue to be exploited in spite of this protective legislation? Then I reasoned to myself, okay, my predecessors, they've had other commitments. They did not pay attention to this. I will focus on this. So in the first 6 months of my stint as sub-collector, I went from one tribal hamlet to another on my jeep, or where not possible to go by jeep, walking from one village to another, telling tribals, I would go sit under a tree. There were 25, 30 tribal people would come. We would chat, talk about it, have some tea. Then I'd tell them that, look, if you people are indebted, if you lost your land because you've been exploited by non-tribals, all you have to do is come and write a petition to me, I'll cancel it. And I told them, if you can't write something yourself, my staff will write it on your behalf. All you have to do is put your thumb impression or sign it. I felt very heroic after I did this for about 6 months. I expected to be flooded with petitions. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Just about 5 or 6 petitions came to me, whereas I expected 50,000 or at least 10,000. Then I thought about it. How come I'm not getting any petitions in spite of evangelizing so earnestly? Then the epiphany came to me. I realized that, I can write off a loan today I can free a particular tribal household from the loan. But what happens tomorrow? If the girl falls ill at 2 o'clock in the morning, the parents need a loan. Take that girl to a hospital, to a doctor. If they have to celebrate a festival, celebrate a wedding, they need a loan. If there is a death in the family, sickness in the family, they need a loan. So who gives them loans? The money lender. So if that one particular household tribal are right off the debt, not only that tribal household, but the entire village is alienating itself from the traditional money lender. Money lenders will no longer lend them, and that lifeline is cut off. So what I realized was that this enthusiasm is okay, but you can't really free tribals from indebtedness unless you provide an alternative. And thereby, the important lesson, keep your ear close to the ground. Reading books, consulting others, consulting your seniors is all good, necessary. But you need to learn from the experience, what's happening on the ground. And that's very important in any position, particularly important for field-level administrators.
Right. But, I just wanted you to give me a little context or, briefly if you could tell me, because in one of the pages you write there that my job as a frontline administrator rather than as administrator on the front line. Why would you say that for a public servant?
Excuse me?
It was in the Srikakulam context that you said that my job was as a frontline administrator rather than as an administrator on the front lines.
Yeah, precisely what I've said, which is that as a frontline administrator, you're supposed to know the field situation, not follow you have to follow instructions from the government, you got to follow rules, regulations, laws, etc. But you got to decide what to do, how to do your action plan, depending on what is the actual situation on the front line. Which is not that I'll just say that I'm going to free all the people from indebtedness. That's not going to happen. So you've got to focus on results.
As civil servants, you were in an era where you said you were trained to be anonymous. That's not the case anymore. You were in an era where there was no phones, there was no internet, but today you have social media picking up every possible, in fact, image, video. What do you see as some of the defining changes in the civil services today in India's steel frame? Maybe the two top changes that you feel have come in, which is not good, which could have been avoided.
I would say not good, but just the one thing I want to say that it is still very important for civil servants to be anonymous. Today, before 50 years ago, 25 years ago, today, and 25 years from now, it's important in a democracy for civil servants to be anonymous. It is the government run by the political executive, which has got to be on the front lines. They are answerable to the people. They've been elected by the people. They're answerable to the people. Their answer in the legislature or in the parliament. Civil servants should not be in the front line taking credit or taking blame. It is the politicians. Civil servants have to assist them. Now, coming to your question about what's changed over the civil service or practice, lots of things have changed. When we're talking about my frontline administrative experience 50 years ago, or even more than 50 years ago, and lots of things have changed. In fact, I write about that in the book. I went back to Parvatipuram, my first posting, and 2 years ago, and it was a completely new experience because the road was world-class. Crumbling dwellings and huts that I saw, they were replaced by pakka construction, some swanky buildings. I used to see girls who were malnourished with hair that was spanky. They were, lean, hungry, not nutritious, not healthy looking. What I saw 50 years later was healthy girls going on a cycle to schools. So lots of things have changed. Administration too has changed. For example, I was talking about how we had no telephone connections. Now you have cell phones, you have video conferences, you have, you can get a feedback from what you've done. I mean, anything that you've done, you can get feedback more quickly than before. But some things have not changed. Things that have not changed are one of them I alluded to, which is the code of conduct for civil servants to be anonymous. the code of conduct for civil servants to be unbiased, to be committed to the larger public interest. And most importantly, in spite of all the technology, for civil servants, especially those in the front lines, to be dirtying their hands, going and seeing for themselves, not relying on some videotape or somebody telling you, or seeing through a video conference, but actually going to the front lines and seeing what's happening, because that can be an enormously enriching experience in terms of results.
So the process has improved, has been enabled by technology, by development. The codes of conduct, though, are they now merely on paper? How steel is the steel frame really? Particularly at a time when you see so many active bureaucrats, not just retired ones, even without a cooling off period, taking active political plunges day in and day out now.
I think the steel frame is still got steel, a lot of steel in it. Okay, I know what you're talking about, which is some civil servants who've gone astray, who succumbed to, what should I say, irregular or succumb to temptations. But those stereotype views are formed by a few people who have gone astray. That's still a minority. It is, sadly, it is an increasing minority, increasing in size, but it's still a minority. The large majority of civil servants, I believe, are still committed to the larger public interest. In fact, I write about that, what one chief minister told me is that, out of we take 100 civil servants, he told me, 25% have gone astray. They're either callous, corrupt, or incompetent. They're no use to me. About 50% have become recalcitrant, have given up. They were smart people when they entered, but they've been spoiled by the system. They've given up the fight. They just want to sit back, do whatever comes their way. They're not doing anything illegal or irregular, but they're not pushing themselves to do the right things. So about 25% are people whom chief ministers, prime ministers, and ministers depend upon. That's the ballpark estimates that chief minister had given me. And that's my own experience too. That's my own estimate too. So I wouldn't write off everybody. There are some black sheep. But the large majority are good. In fact, there's some heartwarming stories that we read in newspapers, on the media, Thousands of unsung heroes across the country, young civil servants who are doing almost impossible things with no support against all odds. And I think it is those civil servants who should be our ideal in this.
Do you think there should be a cooling off period before civil servants, bureaucrats, diplomats, judges take a political plunge?
Oh, most certainly. I think so, yeah.
Any time frame that you have in mind, or
No,
what should be an ideal cooling off period?
When you have to, what do you say in the Christian church, when you have to, Mother Teresa, what do you, canonize? Canonize. You can't canonize a person in the Christian church during the person's lifetime. And I think certain time has to elapse before the canonization takes place. The reason that clause has been put in the Christian church is that the good that person has done has to endure the course of time. It cannot be done in a motion of time, right? So if a civil servant or a judge or anyone else is good, he or she will still be good after 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. So I don't think it's a good practice for public servants, especially, I'm not talking about judges, I'm quite wary about talking about judges, but for civil servants, I think there should certainly be a conduct rule that they cannot enter active politics for a certain cooling off period.
I see a headline coming in there, sir. But coming in, to talking about gender parity today in civil services. I mean, when you started off your career, I think 15% women were collectors. You've had a maximum of 31% women being there as officers. Today, that figure is not working. Working. Yeah, so in 1972, there were 22 out of 142 women, 15%. In 2020, you've had a maximum of 31% women. Today, there are 21% women officers. What is holding back from a greater gender parity? And why we have not had a woman cabinet secretary yet?
Yeah, I've not done an analysis of what's holding back, but from my own experience, I want to tell you. Gender parity at the time of recruitment and gender parity in career management after a person or after a woman has qualified for the IAS or civil service or the foreign service, as the case may be. At the time of recruitment, people say, okay, if you want gender parity, we must provide reservation for women. I don't think that's a very good idea. I think women should be given opportunities to contest and to compete. So the solution at the time of recruitment is not reservation, but to give opportunities to women to be able to compete. One statistic I picked up in course of time is that sometime in the mid-90s, after the Mandal Commission, etc., there were reservation for OBCs, right? Reservation in the services for OBCs. If you actually see the proportion of women who got into the civil services, it was going up from about the mid-70s up until the 90s. After the reservation for OBCs had come, the proportion of women had come down. That's counterintuitive, right? You provide reservation for OBCs, and the proportion of women in civil services, which is going up, has come down. Then I did my own inference of that. What it meant was that the educational opportunities for women in the OBC category were distinctly inferior to those available to men, with the result that women could not compete. Even if there was reservation for OBCs, all that reservation was being grabbed by men, not by women. So the first thing we have to do is provide opportunities for women to compete. Don't give them reservation. Reservation is the wrong solution. Second, about career management. You know, when I joined service, shortly before I joined service, foreign service officers, where Dean Akbaruddin is from, women foreign service officers could not marry. So they could join foreign service only if they said, we're not going to marry. Or if they're married, they have to quit the service. Then they said, in the foreign service, you've got to take permission if you're marrying. Then they said, you can't marry a foreigner. I want to bring this to your notice that our current Minister for External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, distinguished member of the Indian Foreign Service, and now a minister, he has a foreign wife. So lots of things have changed, okay? And that is for the good. In the IAS, career management I was talking about, until in the mid-1970s when I joined the service, women were not being posted as collectors. Okay? Under district collector, as I write in the book, is a defining posting of an IAS officer. In fact, excuse me, people of my parents' generation, they never said, my son has become an IAS officer. They always said, my son has become collector. Because being in the IAS is identified with being collector. And that opportunity or that distinction was being denied to women. Women were not being posted as district collectors, although they got into the IAS. And they were being stereotyped. Women is for Director of Women Welfare or Director of Family Welfare, but not for Finance Secretary, not for Cabinet Secretary. That's changed. You know, and I write again in the book, in 2022, 2 years ago, of the 14 districts in Kerala, 10 were headed by women collectors. And there was a picture of one woman collector who actually brought her nursing child to the office. Okay? So lots of things have changed, but I don't think we are at complete gender parity. We've got a long way to go, but I'm glad to record the improvements and also express the hope that we'll bring complete gender parity in my lifetime.
Okay, let me just bring up 2-3 quick questions on the political pressures and heat that you faced in your crucial postings, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. As RBI governor, Of course, in the book and in the previous memoir too, you have written about the finance ministry, of course, then under Pranab Mukherjee, P. Chidambaram, how they would pressurize the RBI to soften the interest rates and also try and present a rosier estimation of the economy of growth rates. Is that a perpetual problem? And little understanding and sensitivity of how the RBI is working, the autonomy of the RBI, how were you deflecting those pressures?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I want to say that my RBI tenure is just about 2 chapters in that book, maybe about 30 pages in 400 pages. But the newspapers are making it look like the entire book is about my RBI tenure and my feud with the Ministry of Finance. So at least
Ministers are also posting about it, including Smriti Irani, who
Yeah,
posted a series of
yeah.
posts on it.
So first that caveat that my book is much more than my RBI tenure and my conflict or tension with the government of that time. First, as I've said in some of the classes that I've taken here, tensions between the central bank and government are hardwired into the system. Why? Because the main responsibility of a central bank, the Reserve Bank of India in our case, is to maintain price stability, maintain low and steady inflation. Maintaining low and steady inflation requires taking some painful decisions, such as controlling the amount of money you supply, or raising interest rates, which curbs investment, which curbs demand, which in some sense curbs growth, at least in the short term. You can't entrust or leave those decisions to politicians, because politicians are run by elected representatives. They have a short cycle. They're run by the electoral calendar. Whereas these decisions have to be taken with a long-term perspective. That is why decisions about price stability, about monetary policy, are handed over to a distinct body called the central bank, which operates at an arm's length from the government. But having created such a body like the central bank, political leaders are loath to give autonomy to the central bank because they want their own compulsions to be satisfied. So those tensions are there. Those tensions were there in Japan, they're there in Europe, they were there in Turkey, they were there in England, and they were there in the US. Trump he said actually that the Fed has gone crazy. The Federal Reserve is not, China is not our number one enemy. Our number one enemy is the Federal Reserve, stuff like that. See, in America, the president can say things like that, but the markets will still brush it off and perform because institutions there are quite mature. In India, our institutions are not so mature, so any skirmish or any tension like this is likely to lead to undesirable instability in the markets. That's why both governments and central banks have to be more careful about how they manage that relationship. And I had my own problems, which I write about in the book, and governors before me, governors after me have written about their tensions.
And there are governors whose terms have been cut short in recent years. There have been several stories of tension. Increasingly, as you have governments that come into power with more numbers, that are more maybe, that have stronger numbers, that have more authoritarian tendencies, is that a danger for democracy? That you expect a central body, a central governing, a central bank to become a cheerleader of the government?
Well, I don't think that is a function of the strength of the majority of the government, but I think it's certainly a function of the economic situation. If the economy growth is trending down, if inflation is high, if the rupee is volatile, the economic situation is difficult and vulnerable, there are bound to be tensions between the government and the central bank, especially if the government has other political problems like political paralysis that I read about, or if the government is heading into an election, or jobless growth, these things can be problems and can create tension. But if the macroeconomic situation is quite, stable, like today, inflation is trending down, growth is trending up, rupee is stable, the fuel for tension between the government and the central bank is much lower. So I wouldn't say it's a function of the strength of the majority of the government. That is an altogether different variable.
But, keeping in mind that even as finance secretary or in your other roles, you've had your fair share of tensions and turbulence, even with the chief ministers, including Mr. NTR to Mr. Chenna Reddy. What was your go-to mantra on moments when you were really frustrated, you were literally pulling your hair, but, you were not meant to revolt as a bureaucrat?
Yeah. Your conflict attention with the chief minister or the prime minister, when you're a civil servant, is different from the conflict attention you have as governor. As governor, you're head of an autonomous institution. You still have to listen to the government, be responsive to their demands, their concerns, but take your own independent decision. As governor, you have to take the larger public interest, always, even as a civil servant, but as governor, you are the ultimate deciding authority. Okay? But as a civil servant, you can only advise the minister. You're not the final deciding authority. You might disagree, you might give some advice to the minister, and the minister or the chief minister might decide in a different way. Then you cannot say, no, I'm going away. I disagree with you, I'm going away, I don't agree with this. You have to implement that decision. As a civil servant, it is your bounden duty. As long as the chief minister is not telling you to do something irregular, illegal, you have to implement what the chief minister or the government decides. Okay? So I don't think you have any concern. Of course, you can pull your hair, as I have. I'm living proof of that. But you have to obey the minister. That is democracy.
Just one question, and then whoever has a question, please raise your hand. We'll send a mic across your way. Because the 2G news is back in headlines. The government has indicated that they do want to go back to court to seek a sort of a revision of the existing ban on spectrum allocation through auctions. Now, you were a prosecution witness in the case, and there's a chapter there. A, were you a hero? Were you a villain in the case? And B, does this not then vindicate the past government if the government is actually, after having demonized that entire process, there are also questions about the figures that were put forward by the CAG as having been inflated, that you're wanting to go back to that similar allocation process?
Whether I'm a hero or villain of the 2G scam, I think I leave it to the readers to decide. In fact, I leave that as an open-ended question in my book. But I cannot go into the entire story. There's not enough time. But very briefly, what happened was that in 2008, when I became finance secretary, Department of Telecom decided that they should give additional licenses in each of the telecom circles. And they consulted TRI. TRI said you should give additional licenses. And the price at which licenses should be given had come to the finance ministry. I'm talking about 2008. As finance secretary, I had said that we cannot give licenses in 2008 at a price discovered in 2001. We must rediscover the price through a fresh auction. Why did I say that? I said that because between 2001 and 2008, in that 7-year gap, across the world, including in India, we realized that the spectrum is a more valuable commodity than reflected in the 2001 price, and that value, some other value, must accrue to the government. The Department of Telecom did not agree with our advice. So they went ahead and issued licenses. There were lots of complaints, grievances about the licensing process. I was not involved in that. The licensing process was the subject matter of criminal investigation and prosecution. Then Minister Raja and some officials went through a court prosecution. That's a different matter. Where I was involved was only in the pricing issue. So I said it must be given at a newly discovered price, whereas the government, there was a difference of opinion between the Department of Telecom and the Ministry of Finance. So we went to the Prime Minister, and in that small meeting with the Prime Minister, it was decided that that batch of spectrum would be given at the 2001 price, but all future spectrum would be given at a price discovered in future auctions. Case settled, right? What happened was that 6 months after those licenses were given, some of the licensees who got licenses at presumably a lower rate went for a public issue. And those public issues went at a very high premium. What that showed was that spectrum was actually given at a much lower price than the market commanded. Then the media picked it up, the CAG picked it up, politicians picked it up, opposition picked it up, saying that the government gave away spectrum at a runaway, throwaway price. Then it became subject matter of CAG audit, the Supreme Court order, JPC, Parliament Committee, etc. So I was called before all these bodies. And I would say they would applaud me as a hero, because I was the hero, right? I said, it must be given, we must rediscover the price. I was the only one who said it. So they'll say, you're a great guy. You are the only one who stood up for the government revenues. But instead, what they asked me was, why didn't you press with that? Why did you give up the fight? Okay, you are a civil servant. You should have persisted with that. I kept telling them that to your earlier question, which is an answer to one of your earlier questions, which is that I'm a civil servant. I can only give advice. And the government was not doing anything irregular. They were not doing anything illegal. If the government decided that we will give spectrum in 2007 at 2001 price, and they had some justification, rationale for it, it is open to a democratically elected government to do so. And I also write in the book that it is not open to the CAG to question that. So that is the entire 2G story, and whether I'm a hero or a villain for you to decide, but that's the story.
Okay, let me open it up, in fact, to questions. Please raise your hands. Okay, Shivang and then Bhagyashree. Keep your questions short. We'll take 2-3 questions at one go. Prateek.
Good afternoon, sir. So, my question to you is, you have seen the state, it's about the state of Andhra Pradesh. You've seen it closely since the time you've done your studies. It was, you might have been a little young for, to take notice. But
I was indeed young at one time,
yeah. So the state went from the Madras presidency to Andhra Pradesh, and you would have seen the transition from Andhra Pradesh to Andhra Pradesh and Telangana as well. So what are the changes that you've seen throughout happen in front of your eyes? I wanted to know.
Okay, maybe we'll just keep it to 1 or 2 key change. Let me take 2 other questions. And keep them brief, please. Shivang.
Sir, my question is regarding the nature of examination, civil services examination. So over the years, the number of applicants has risen a lot in comparison to the number of seats which are to be filled by the UPSC. So what is happening is like majority of people are screened out in the prelims examination. So for example, 5 lakh people are sitting for the prelims, 4,85,000 are not getting the chance to go for the mains examination. And in prelims, what happens is it's matter of speed, how you guess, so a lot of factor plays into play. So what is your sense in the sense of like many people calls for reform in the UPSC examination because there are some anomaly considering the number of applicants?
Next question, Bhagyashree. I'm going to read it to Hashtas Master now.
Hello sir, I am Bhagyashree from the first year of MPP, and I would like to thank you so much for the insightful discussion about your experience. I will keep my question crisp. So I am very touched by your experience when you were posted in the tribal area. And sir, how the empathizing with the end user, which is the beneficiary, with the people and being grounded and know their ground reality before making a policy, because we have seen so much of policy failures are happening in the contemporary days. So how empathizing with the people and knowing their ground reality before making a policy is important.
And you may empathize, but your government may think that good economics will make for bad politics.
No, can I?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Those questions quickly about Vivek's question about changes from Andhra to Madras presidency to Andhra Pradesh and then to Telangana, right? Please sit down, please sit down. Okay, I had not seen the transition from Andhra to Andhra Pradesh, but Andhra Pradesh to Telangana, it happened in our lived experience. All of you have seen that. You know, when it was a combined state of Andhra Pradesh, we worked both in the Andhra area and in the Telangana area. There were some differences in the sense of dialect, in terms of food habits, in terms of living experiences, markets, etc. But we were becoming integrated, you know, because people were moving from one part of the state to another. So that osmosis was taking place. And I thought that in course of time, if not in my time, my children's lifetime, there'll be a homogeneous state. But that did not happen. The state got divided. Now it's the wrong platform to decide whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing. But it happened, and I'm hoping that both states will prosper in spite of the division. On civil service, you know, since the time I appeared 50 years ago, there have been lots of commissions, lots of committees and reforms to the civil service. And you refer to that yourself. There is a prelim exam now, out of which 95% are eliminated. Only 5% get to focus on the mains, which is a good thing. You don't waste the time of 485,000 candidates. But I want to tell you this, and further reforms are indeed necessary. There is no known system of examination that can actually test the administrative capability of a candidate who's 22 or 23 years old. There's no known examination anywhere in the world. So you commit both type 1 and type 2 errors. Lots of people get through the exam who are bad administrators. Lots of people who are potentially good administrators fail to get through the exam. The reform focus should be to minimize type 1 and type 2 errors, that those who get in are good administrators, and those who get left out are not fit to be administrators. It's difficult. There's no exam system. And it's not just my view, it's not just the Indian experience, it's the world experience. That book by Daniel Kahneman, some of you might have read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. There is another book he wrote, so after that, it's called Noise. And about 2 or 3 chapters are devoted only to this, about how we make wrong judgments. All of us, in spite of, I come to this, go to a restaurant, have breakfast, I make a wrong judgment about what I should have, in spite of all my experience. Okay? You make wrong judgments about people. So this is a common fallacy in an examination system such as the civil service. We must try to minimize the errors, but I don't think it's possible to eliminate them.
If I
What he said was that, youngsters spend 10 years, the IAS exam or the civil service exam is a 10-year project, and people succumb to a sunk cost fallacy. You get 6 chances, we appeared 4 times, you've invested so much effort that you don't want to give up. You might say, oh my God, let me appear the 5th time. And then when you've done the 5th time, you say, oh, let me finish the last chance. So you spent a lot of your youthful time, energy, in preparing for the civil service, and by the time you finish that project, you are perhaps too old to try other things. I agree with that. I agree that the number of chances should be reduced. 6 is too many. Perhaps you give more to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and OBC candidates. For the open list candidates, 6 chances is too many. And the age limit is 22 to 32. That I think is too long. So you must reduce the age limit, you must reduce the number of chances. And that should be done by the administrators, not by the candidates. Don't expect the candidates to give up and say, oh, I've done twice, I can't make it now, I give up. They will not do that. The more effort they put into it, the more they're committed to it, and there's a sunk cost fallacy.
To Bhagyashree's question, empathy when it comes to listening to, and also maybe
Yeah.
that conflict with what the
Yeah.
government's approach
Yeah.
may be.
Bhagyashree, that's a very interesting question because, in your introductory comments, Smita, you said that as one of the first IITians to get into the IAS. Subsequently, it's a flood of IITians to get into the IAS. And I once asked some instructors in the academy, do you see any difference between IIT IAS officers and non-IIT IAS officers? This is at the entry level, okay, after they've just qualified. He said something very interesting. He said these IIT students, they're like, okay, don't give us all this yarn about commitment, empathy, pity, sympathy, and all that. Tell us this has to be done. Tell us 90% of people have to be vaccinated by end of December 2024, we will do it. Don't tell us, you got to help people get vaccinated, you got to prevent them from getting coronavirus and all that. Don't tell us all that nonsense. Tell us we've got to vaccinate 90% of people, we'll do it. Whereas the non-IIT students are like, okay, more commitment. Why are we doing this? This is to prevent people from getting COVID. We must empathize with them. And if their children are going to school, we must go back after the school is done. If they're gone away for, migrated somewhere, we must inform them about coming back. We must watch out for them. Whereas the IIT guys are watching 90%, okay, I'll get 90%. So that's the difference. I hope that is wrong. Okay? But that's what that instructor told me. I believe personally that some understanding, empathy for the problem you're addressing is important for you to get effective results. Just this illustration that I've given you about COVID vaccination, you can do it very efficiently, very mechanically, and efficiently indeed. You can do 90% coverage. But if you have empathy, and if you understand the larger purpose of why you're doing this, I think you'll be a much more productive and happy civil servant.
Hopefully, if we can find that balance where things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Do we have another 5-7 minutes to take 2 questions? Because I would also like him to read an excerpt from his book. Anybody from the faculty who has a question? Faculties are also allowed to ask questions. Okay, go ahead, Rohit.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is, do you think RBI is losing its independence as compared during your tenure as a RBI governor than during this present government?
And Kanika? Can you pass the mic to her as well? Maybe you can answer and we'll take Kanika's question next.
Yeah. RBI's independence is a question that I cannot answer in the closing moments of a session like this, but that is a very important question. I don't think RBI is getting less independent. In fact, over time, RBI has got more independent. This impressionistic view that RBI is getting less independent is shaped by a lot of news, sensational news, misleading news that comes in the media. Okay? RBI is expected to be independent. It is independent. And there are tensions, as I said, between the government and the central bank. How those tensions are managed is a function of 2 things. It's a function of the macroeconomic situation, which I talked about earlier. It is also a function, it's also a function of the chemistry between the finance minister and prime minister on one side and the governor on the other side. So it's something that mature leaders on both sides have to learn to manage.
Kanika?
Good afternoon, sir.
Don't look at the watch.
I was actually wondering, based on what you said about civil servants being in the background and being anonymous, with social media, it's also added a positive tool in the way that they're able to propagate the ideas of the government in a positive way. And if just your comments on that, if that's had some positive impact as well.
Because it's a closed classroom, I want to say this. When Prime Minister said that civil servants should go and tell the public what the government has accomplished, he said that about 1 year ago.
This is also on the record, I think. There are news channels.
But nevertheless, I will say this, since I've started saying it. That became quite controversial. Whether the Prime Minister can instruct the civil servants to tell the public, to educate the public on all the good things that the government has done. That's a borderline issue. If you're actually telling civil servants that, look, publicize on behalf of the government so that I get political mileage, absolute no. But publicize in order for people to know what the government is doing so that more good things can happen, that's a good thing. For example, if the Prime Minister tells civil servants, tell people that we built, let's say, 100,000 toilets in the last 10 years. That's a good thing. Because if people know that 100,000 toilets have been built, people who don't have toilets will come and say, can we have a toilet? So, sir, the deciding line, the dividing line is very thin. And it is a line that both politicians and civil servants have to be conscious of and respect. Okay? So I cannot say anything more than this, but that is a very difficult line, a difficult judgment.
Okay, I think we will be wrapping up this session now. You can take this conversation later on, but I have requested Dr. Subbarao to read out an excerpt because he wrote a letter to his Amma. It's a letter to my mother, leadership lessons I learned the hard way. And it's a beautifully written, heartwarming, in fact, note to the mother. I also wonder if you ever thought, did your mother think of you as a mercenary? Because you chose to go with that title. But if you could read out a certain portion of this letter, sir.
No, my mother, like all mothers, would never have thought of a son as a mercenary. Okay, but nevertheless, I have those self-doubts. And thank you for inviting me to read this. It means a lot to me because the last chapter of the book is a letter to my mother, who is no more, who passed away 30 years ago. Here's an excerpt from that letter. When I was appointed governor of the Reserve Bank in September 2008, I went to call on Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in his South Block office. The meeting lasted just about 15 minutes. During that brief conversation, I asked him if he had any advice to give me, since he himself had served as governor of the RBI earlier. Characteristically, he demurred. He just said, Subbarao, you've been an IAS officer. You know the country and the people. As Finance Secretary here in Delhi, you've interacted with the RBI and are familiar with what the governor's job entails. I'm sure you'll do well. Shortly thereafter, I stood up to leave. He graciously walked me to the door and literally at the doorstep, put his hand on my shoulder and said to me, Subbarao, you asked for my advice. Let me give you just one piece of advice. You're moving from long experience in the IAS to the Reserve Bank. That's a big change. Unlike in civil service jobs, in the Reserve Bank, you risk losing touch with reality. Your mind will become so cluttered with numbers like inflation, interest rate, money supply, and credit growth that you will forget that there are real people behind those numbers. Please be watchful of that possible blind spot. In short, the Prime Minister was saying the same thing that Baba always admired in successful people. That's my father. Keep your ear close to the ground. I related to this advice particularly during my long fight against high and stubborn inflation for over 2 years during my RBI tenure. Inflation hurts everyone, but it hurts the poor disproportionately. I remember how Baba and you used to struggle to manage a household budget on a low middle class income when we were growing up. Bringing inflation down from 7% to 5% is not just a numbers game. It means providing comfort to millions of poor households in the country. I have written about this in the book under the title, Listening to the Voices of Silence. But I'm mentioning it here just to let you know that many things that you told us when we were growing up meshed with my life experiences. Thank you very much.
Those were beautiful words, and something that I always stress to my students too, that even when it comes to storytelling, without empathy, sympathy, and using your critical faculties of asking the right questions, you cannot get a story right. So just to break it down for the younger generation, propaganda or WhatsApp पे ना जाओ, बल्कि real narratives को ground पे जाके समझिए, keep your ears to the ground. And this was beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Subbarao. Thank you, Ambassador Akbaruddin, and to all of you who have been present here for this book launch. It was an honor being in conversation with you. Thank you.
Time for vote of thanks. I would really want to thank our colleagues from Geetham University and the students also, who despite their busy schedule of examination have taken out time for today's event. It is always nice to see old friends joining to make this event even more memorable. Thank you, Mr. Nanhar Ramji and your team. Thank you to all the media professionals who have joined us today. Thank you all the staff members from Kautilya, our studio team very importantly, Piaro Garu, and who have been working on this, organizing this event. Most importantly, thank you Kankana and Ajesh for organizing this. And thank you everyone present here in the audience and our dean. And thank you sir, thank you ma'am.
Thank you, Shivangi.
Just one important announcement. We have a stall right outside here for the books. You can get this book and also the previous book. And you can get it signed. Kankana, can you just show your hand? And she would be your point of contact. So she will make the process easier for you to get your name in the book. So do reach out to her after buying your copy. And that's all. We have lunch in the Stilt canteen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're here for lunch?